Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you here on the 25th of August. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather information around Alaska by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line's open at 800-472-0391. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. And of course, if you go to YouTube after this show and type in AKwx TV in the search bar, you can watch the whole thing. About 4 o'clock, though, we give you a sneak peek at what's coming your way in the surface weather charts there, the NWS Anchorage account. And if you search for AKwx, that's an easy way to find that, or just type in NWS Anchorage and you'll find that service there on YouTube again. Here's a look at the fire danger, and you'll notice some areas still around kind of the high level there. Most of that's around the Yukon Valley and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. One area just north of the Alaska Range out east, fairly close to Northway and Tok. Still running on the dry side there. Quite a bit of rain is falling across a large part of the state, though, so chances are where it's going to be tamped down fairly quickly over the next couple days. And, of course, we are losing daylight fairly quickly at this point. And with the moisture in place and temperatures going down, the relative risk of fire danger is also going along with that, but always a good idea to be extra careful. Here's a look at the Bering Sea satellite picture now in the North Pacific, stretching all the way out toward eastern Asia. Of course, this is a wide expanse of land that's smushed down into a small map, so we lose a lot of that perspective fairly easily. We do have a pretty good wealth of moisture moving across the North Pacific right now. Several of these impulses, stretching from Japan all the way toward the Aleutians, contain quite a bit of moisture with them, and as that travels north and east, eventually finding its way into the Gulf and the southern Bering Sea, those storms push that into the interior and southeast as they go, and each one of them is packing a decent amount of rain. Some of that's already reaching the south and western coast. Looking at the visible satellite picture, partly cloudy sky in sections of southeastern Alaska today, but where it hasn't been quite as sunny, the rain is falling there in some parts of central and southern southeast. Out across the western Gulf, we have dry patches of air, and then clouds quickly moved in across Bristol Bay and the northern parts of the Alaska Peninsula, where rain is falling once again. And if you look carefully, you can kind of see the spiraling structure across south central Alaska. That is another area of low pressure, and underneath that is, again, a wealth of rain across the Kenai Peninsula, the Alaska Range that points west into the Kuskokwim Valley and the middle Yukon Valley, and even a few showers and thunderstorms across the Alcan border and north of the Alaska Range. Watch one more time and you can kind of track some of that bubble feature across the eastern sections there, where we get the dry patches across the Copper River Basin. Quickly that turns into more of that upward moving air, the cumulus clouds capable of supporting the showers and thunderstorms that we see at this time of the year. Across the north, a little bit more sunshine north of the Yukon Valley out toward Kotzebue, some sunshine reaching the bay there and around Nome and the Norton Sound, some drier weather. Across the Arctic coast, areas of fog thanks to high pressure camped out just north of the Alcan border there in Demarcation Point. Low pressure sitting across south central tonight at 1,003 millibars. To the east, we have a frontal boundary working its way through southeastern Alaska. Mainly showers and scattered clouds with that. A few areas are experiencing a little bit more lowered visibility as a result of that frontal boundary moving through. To the north, a frontal boundary that's falling apart. The occlusion there is where the warm air, the cold air is overrunning the warm air in this case, and showers and thunderstorms have developed out ahead of it. Behind that, the wraparound cloud cover and showers hitting the western slopes of the Alaska Range at 1,001 millibars. So this is a complete system here, and it's kind of folding in on top of itself. Out across the west, more of a westerly flow developing along that low pressure wave just north of the Aleutians, working its way along the chain. You can see a weak ridge of high pressure here extending into the southern Bering Sea. And to the north of that, another wave of colder air trying to work toward the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Warmer air is briefly organizing along the Brooks Range slopes. It's really a difference between the colder air that you see across the coastal plain and the slightly warmer air across the Bering Strait. To the north of that boundary, in the Brooks Range summits, we have low clouds, fog, and high pressure at 1,015 millibars. That's going to scoot eastward a little bit more tonight and keep that brief easterly flow going. It should be pretty light. There is a fog across the Beaufort Seacoast and the Chukchi Seacoast into the Bering Strait. Our low pressure wave across the Aleutians is working its way eastward very slowly. There's a little bit of colder air on the back side of it, but eventually this will probably wrap in on itself, as so many of these storms do, and I probably won't see as much of a cold front passing through anymore. It'll just be a wave of low pressure that stirs up the rainfall. Across south central and outside of Prince William Sound, a 1,008 millibar low there is pushing moisture into the Wrangell-St. Elias region, Yakutat, and parts of southern southeast, all looking for some periods of rain over tonight and into tomorrow around Prince William Sound. But for areas along the Kenai Peninsula, look for some gradual drying to take place. And for many along the western Kenai Peninsula, Kenai, Soldotna, northward toward the Knik and Turnagain Arms and the Matanuska-Susitna valleys, it's been a fairly soggy day. That trend should gradually ease as we head toward tomorrow. As we get into Tuesday, there will be more clouds than rainfall across south central. For southeast, periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain, especially in the northern parts of the Gulf as you get out toward Gustavus, northward toward Yakutat. To the west, our frontal boundary just hasn't moved very much, and the low pressure system that's moving all of that air along with it is creeping its way across the southern Bering, now toward Atka and closing in on Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and Nikolsky. The warmer air out ahead of it, again, is not terribly much warmer. So once again, the opportunity for this to kind of merge into one big ball of low pressure is certainly there. Showers and thunderstorms will likely be a little more widely scattered across the interior, the middle and Yukon Valley, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, and then the farther north you go past the summits there, over Anaktuvik Pass and beyond, you're going to see a lot more cloud cover than anything else. High pressure sitting just north of Canada now at this point. Areas of fog should be expected all the way down the Chukchi Seacoast. But if you see any precipitation, it really looks like a lot of that's going to be more drizzle than anything else. But there is another disturbance that is dropping southward. You can see that frontal boundary moving across the Bering Strait as we get into Wednesday. And as that gets closer, there's a much better chance for more sustained rainfall across the Chukchi Seacoast. Areas along the eastern Brooks Range and the Yukon Valley, looking at least some moderate rainfall. Showers a little bit further southward into the upper Susitna Valley. And here comes another wave of low pressure. This one is a little bit more organized than what we were dealing with. As that moves out of the Aleutians, it brings in another surge of Pacific moisture and should start producing some moderate to occasionally heavy rainfall around Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, Lake Iliamna, and northward. And as that does so, it'll start to fill in those more cloudy gaps with more falling precipitation. Southeastern Alaska, looking at some moderate rainfall there, really all the way around the Gulf. Places in the central Gulf, though, are looking at some slightly drier weather. And out across the west, low pressure is organized once again down to 997 millibars there, with warmer and wetter air moving back into the western parts of the chain as high pressure tries to slow that northward progression of that warmer and wetter air into the Bering Sea. Here's a look at temperatures today then. Upper 50s and lower 60s for a good part of southeast. Yakutat was 61. Temps were fairly close to that around Juneau, Sitka, Ketchikan, and Annette, all about lower 60s. There were some pockets of rainfall around town. 61 in Hyder. Around Prince William Sound, mid-50s today. 51 in Seward, 58 in Homer, around 58 as well in Kenai, and 55 in Anchorage. 56 for Talkeetna, 50 at the Matanuska Glacier, 60 up the road in Glen Allen, and lower 60s around Northway. There were some areas around Glen Allen today that were kind of gusty, and some of that air is working its way up the Cook Inlet, as you may have noticed. A little blustery on the western side of town. 62 in Kodiak. As you get up to Fairbanks, 63 degrees there. Healy was showing 55. Lower 60s around the Alcan, stretching northward into Fort Yukon was 55. 55 as well for Arctic Village. The Arctic coast was showing temperatures anywhere from the upper 30s around Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay, and Deadhorse to Barrow at 38. 40 in Akasuk, 47 around Wainwright, and Point Hope and Point Lay in the mid-50s. Looked like Kotzebue was 61 with Shishmaref at 52. Kivalina showing 57 today, 61 in Nome. Savunga had 54. Around Unalakleet it was 60 degrees with McGrath at 56. Grayling at 61. Galena about 59 degrees, so still some pleasant weather there. Looking a little bit further down toward the southwest coast and the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, temperatures hovered in the mid-50s. Again, inland it was a little bit milder around Bethel. Lower 60s around Dillingham and King Salmon. The Pribilofs were hovering in the upper 50s. Still very mild temperatures out there. The Alaska Peninsula saw temperatures generally in the 50s and 60s. 55 in Dutch Harbor on Alaska, mid-50s for Adak and Atka, and 53 way out in Attu. Now tonight, look for temperatures to hover in the lower 50s. Around the Pribilofs, temps will go just below the 50-degree mark. One thing to note, Cold Bay and I believe King Salmon both saw temperatures that will probably go down as record low temperatures for this date in history. If you thought it was pretty warm last night, it was. It was one of the warmest nights we've recorded on the state, again hovering around 52 to 53 degrees. Kodiak 48 degrees overnight, lower 50s for southeast. The interior expecting overnight lows in the mid to upper 40s, south central lower 50s. The Arctic coast, anywhere in the coastal plain there, probably getting pretty close to freezing tonight. Nome, you'll see about 47 degrees with a high temperature nearly 10 degrees warmer tomorrow. Barrow, Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse hovering in the lower to mid 40s tomorrow. Around Wainwright a little bit milder. Fairbanks still looking at temperatures breaking the 60-degree mark. McGrath, low to mid-60s for you. Galena should be mild as well. As you get into King Salmon and Dillingham and Bristol Bay, lower 60s are expected. 61 in Kodiak, upper 50s and lower 60s for southeast. South Central also looking for a milder day with highs in the lower 60s. Flying weather includes IFR conditions along and especially offshore of the Arctic coast, through the Bering Strait, through St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew Island waters, and through the Pribilofs, and for a good part of the west central Aleutians, let's say, and some pockets across the northern Gulf Coast, but inland, anywhere east of Valdez, north of Cordova, through the Wrangell, St. Elias, and northern sections, including the passes in southeastern Alaska. Let's check on those. Anaktuvik Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions. We will be watching for convection there and in Adigan Pass throughout the day tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass likely returning to IFR conditions as we go throughout the day. So what you see in the morning could get a little bit lower and worse throughout the day. Rainy Pass, MVFR conditions are expected with showers and thunderstorms possible in the day. Windy, probably looking at MVFR conditions there. And for Isabel Pass, we expect marginal conditions through the bulk of your Tuesday. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions. Tanita Pass should be MVFR. Portage Pass, IFR, especially on the eastern side, but a good part of Portage Pass itself may hold at MVFR conditions throughout the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see that visibility and probably being a little more limited throughout the afternoon, perhaps going to IFR. Now, freezing levels, you'll notice a colder air is still hovering north of the Bering Strait, but the overall pattern that you see here is that very large dip in the atmosphere. That's that upper level low pressure system dragging colder air into Alaska. Freezing levels for most of the state between about 6,000 and 8,000 feet, let's say. For southeastern Alaska, generally south of Sitka and Petersburg, those levels could go to about 8,000 to 10,000 feet. And west of Dutch Harbor and Alaska, again, 8,000 to 10,000 feet there. But most of the mainland between 6 and 8. Icing potential generally above 8,000 feet around the Cook Inlet and northward. You could see some light to isolated moderate. Most of what we were seeing today was light mixed or light rime. Some of that way up around Kaktovik this afternoon. Around Norton Sound above 8,000 feet, you could run into some light icing potential there, generally south of the chain along the frontal boundary. That'll be pretty high up there, and across southeastern Alaska, also above 8,000 feet, again, as in the wake of that frontal boundary working its way through. The jet stream shows the trough of low pressure, another wave of that dropping southward across the west coast. We still have our Arctic jet stream north of the coastline at 65 knots and our southwesterly flow coming across the Dixon entrance region around 50 knots with the sustained jet stream of the Pacific jet still generally from the eastern parts of Asia and out over the Gulf of Alaska. At 9,000 feet, our westerly flow is pretty dominant here. You can see we don't really have any large-scale southwesterly flow or any northerly flow dropping down. It's pretty much a west to easterly flow. That's going to keep the moisture moving right on from the Pacific and the Bering right into mainland Alaska, and that'll keep any storms that are caught up in this flow pretty much moving right along. So this would be what we would call a progressive weather pattern. Things are moving right along there. And a pretty decent onshore flow coming into southeastern Alaska between 15 and 25 knots. Pretty much the same thing you see there at 3,000 feet. Winds are fairly light across the interior and the Yukon Valley between 10 and about 15 knots. Winds pick up a little bit more across the Arctic coast around 20 knots, and low pressure just kind of sitting out here and spinning around the St. Matthew Island waters. 25-knot winds pretty much due west across the Aleutians. A little bit more of a southerly flow, though, developing ahead of the next wave of low pressure. That's what you see here, curving back into the Kamchatka Peninsula at 35 knots. So putting it all together with turbulence, we have to watch out for convection again across the central and eastern, even northern parts of the Yukon Valley and south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. And offshore, around the Chukchi Seacoast, some light to isolated moderate to be expected with the next wave dropping southward. Also across the central and western chain below 4,000 feet. And along the dying areas of the frontal boundary, probably still looking at some chop there south of Haida Gwaii. But other than that, probably not looking at any major large-scale area of turbulence expected across the mainland. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with a look at today's sea ice edge and, of course, your marine weather forecast. Stay tuned.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest this evening is a young pilot biologist that currently flies for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Anna, welcome to Hangar Flying.
Thanks.
Anna has an amazingly varied background that involves aviation. But to hear her say it, she's not sure how she got there. So let me kind of recount what you had told me. You grew up in Gillette, Wyoming, building model rockets and going to aviation camps. Then you found yourself at University of North Dakota. And you certainly didn't waste any time there, picking up everything from CFII to MEI. And you started flight instructing there. Then you followed with a Cessna 340 in Seneca in weather modification studies. What was that?
In North Dakota, they have a program called weather modification for hail suppression on the crops there. So you have silver iodide cloud seeding generators to give a particle into the thunderstorm so that instead of the super cool liquid water going up and making huge hailstones, it falls sooner with the silver iodide. Has something to latch onto. And then the dry ice, we put it in the feeder clouds from the top.
So you delivered that, flew over these clouds? Wow.
Yeah, a lot of the times we didn't see where the storms were, and we'd be called out to go at night, and we'd wait for lightning, and then we'd see where the storm was and fly towards it. And
I don't know if I want to hear this. So you went from there to, or some of the other things that you did, an internship with Alaska Air, flew -8s for Piedmont, was a ramper for ERA, and flew the Astra for GCI, as if that wasn't enough. Had Lake Hood sightseeing, Copper Valley Air, and a stint flying the Pilatus in Wyoming. But it was always back to Alaska. Before we get there, tell our audience about what I think must have been an intriguing job, and that was your last one, flying lion surveys in Africa.
I flew in the summers doing a lot of sightseeing tours, and so I didn't have a winter job, and so I was going to volunteer and do wildlife surveys over in Kenya, and then when I went over there, one of the lodges needed a pilot, so I ended up flying for a lodge over there doing a lot of taking guest places, but then also we had 7 collared lions, and we tracked them with telemetry and then counted all the other animals that were on the truss land. Yes.
So I can honestly say, I've been doing this for 7 years. I've never had anybody that talked about flying in Africa. So let's tell our audience about availability of strips and fuel, and what was the flying like?
The flying had a lot of challenging weather. In Nairobi got lots of fog and rain all the time, and there was only 2 airstrips that were published, and that was Mombasa in Nairobi, Jomo Kenyatta, and then Wilson in Nairobi, kind of downtown. And then the rest were dirt strips all over the country, and most of them weren't published, and a lot of like 135 commercial operators kept it as private knowledge, and so it was really hard to get lat and longs to a lot of the airstrips, conditions, what direction they were. Nobody had fuel, so you had to do a lot of fuel management besides Nairobi and Mombasa, and then stashing barrels around places if you knew people, but otherwise it was a large learning curve.
So you didn't have an Alaska supplement?
No.
Well, okay. We got about a minute and a half, but I got to get a couple more questions, and I'm going to get you back next time. We're going to talk about flying in Alaska, but survival kit must have been different.
Yeah, we had like snake bite things, carried more water, 'cause a lot of drought conditions over there, and no winter flying stuff. I brought a sat phone, no phone service out there.
Good GPS reception.
Yep, good. I didn't have a GPS in my plane over there, so I bought my own 496 over here and brought it over there.
Were you flying 206?
Yep, 206 and a Super Cub.
Any modifications that we don't have, or did you use
Nope.
big tires on the Super Cub? Did you?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yep.
interesting.
But there
Okay.
was a lot of acacia thorns, though, that are like this long, so you had to really be careful.
Wow. So we've run out of time. I'm going to get you back on, and I want to talk about some of your flying here in Alaska.
Okay.
That a deal?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being on tonight.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. And tune in next time. We'll have Anna back. And in the meantime, I would remind you that the Safety Foundation is it's a nonprofit, and we're supported entirely by you guys. So go to www.aasfonline.org. Renew your membership or join if you haven't yet. And until next time, fly safe.
Thanks again, Harry. We'll see you again on Friday. Here's today's Sea Ice Edge, and you'll notice a wealth of real estate here that is pretty much wide open, except for that small little area, probably 25, maybe 30 nautical miles at most. It still has some rotting sea ice along the barrier islands there north and east of Prudhoe Bay. So if you're seeing ice, that's probably what it is, but most areas in the Arctic coast right now are sea ice free. You can always get this information from our sea ice team here in Alaska at weather.gov. at Anchorage/ice.php. Again, that information's there, and you can build maps like this using the same information that we can see and share with you there. Here's a look at the information now for southeastern Alaska. No ice, of course. It looks like a nice and breezy day across the inner waterways. 10, 20, even 25 knot winds as you get up into the Lynn Canal with a 5-foot sea, 2-foot seas a little bit further south. An onshore flow into Gustavus, Sitka, and down into the Dixon entrance between 10 and 20 knots from the west and southwest. One exception will be a little bit further north into the northeastern Gulf around Yakutat. You're looking at a southeasterly flow of 5-foot seas expected there with a 25-knot wind. That really dies off as you get into Wednesday. Southerlies take over there around Yakutat, more of an onshore flow continuing south from Gustavus all the way to the Dixon entrance. 10 to 15-knot winds with 6-foot seas. Otherwise, a northwesterly flow in the inner waterways, 10-knot winds up to 20-knot winds the further south you go, 2 to 4-foot seas, and southerlies inside the Lynn Canal, especially as you get northward. Those winds will pick up and the seas come up to about 4 feet. A variable flow inside and outside of Prince William Sound, 10 to 15-knot winds expected there. 2-foot seas on the inside. Same goes for the northern part of the Cook Inlet, more of a southerly flow as you get south of Kenai. Westerly wind coming over the Barren Islands, about 15 knots, 3-foot seas to the west, 6-foot seas to the east, and 7-foot seas east of Kodiak Island. Inside Shelikof Strait, a southwesterly wind will blow up to 20 knots. That turns to more of a southeasterly flow on Wednesday. 5-foot seas expected inside the strait, 5 to 6-foot seas east of the Barren Islands down toward Kodiak Island. South and easterly flow in the northern Gulf. Inside of Prince William Sound, it's down to 10 knots with a 2-foot sea, and southeasterlies are blowing across the northern part of the Cook Inlet at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. 4-foot seas on a south wind continue north of Homer to Kenai. As you get into the Alaska Peninsula and around Bristol Bay, expect a westerly flow, 20 knots there. In fact, we'll find 20-knot winds across most of the peninsula for Tuesday. 6-foot seas on the Bering side, 6 to 7-foot seas on the Pacific side. Wednesday, a little bit of a shift as the low pressure and the wave works its way across the peninsula. Southerlies pick up into Castle Cape and east of Chignik at 25 knots. Northwesterlies coming off of King Cove and Sand Point with an 11-foot sea at 30 knots. Easterlies inside of Bristol Bay, but westerlies a little bit further down the coast with a 7-foot sea and winds up to 25 knots there. Across the Aleutians for Tuesday, southwesterly winds will be predominant. Look for a 20 to 25 knot wind across the Bering Sea coast, 25 knot winds across the Pacific coast, 9 to 12 foot seas there on the south side, 7 foot seas on a northeasterly wind out around Attu and Shemya. With 15 knots blowing there from the northeast, that switches to the south on Wednesday, 20 knots. Southwesterlies are still going around Adak, Atka, and Nikolsky with 4 foot seas there. Otherwise, a west and southwesterly flow on the Pacific side with winds at 25 to 30 knots and 8 to 10 foot seas expected for Wednesday. Across the west coast, a south and westerly flow will continue for St. Lawrence Island out toward the St. Matthew Island waters and the Pribilofs, 15 knots with a 4 foot sea. Westerlies into the Kuskokwim Delta region, 20 knots with a 5 foot sea. That becomes northeasterly on Wednesday with a 4 foot sea. Winds become light and variable off the coast of Hooper Bay. And southwesterlies continue around St. Lawrence Island with winds turning to more of a northwesterly direction at 20 knots around the Pribilofs, 5 foot seas for Wednesday. Across the north coast, look for an easterly flow in the Beaufort Sea, around 15 knots with a 3 foot sea expected. Winds will be light and somewhat variable around the Chukchi seacoast, 10 knots there, more from the north and west into Kotzebue Sound, more of a westerly flow as you get around Cape Lisburne and Point Lay to Wainwright. That becomes an easterly flow with a 3 foot sea, southeasterlies north of Barrow, but all regions on Wednesday become southwesterly. We'll keep the light winds around the Beaufort seacoast and 20 knot winds pretty much all the way down the Chukchi seacoast with seas ranging around 4 feet or so from Barrow down into the Kotzebue Sound area. Recapping tonight's weather, widespread areas of rain will continue across the mainland and especially around the Gulf Coast. As a wave of low pressures working across the north coast, those south and westerly winds will pick up quite a bit of wet weather moving it through Prince William Sound and into the northern parts of southeast, pockets of light rain a little bit further south. For areas along the Alaska Range, expect visibilities to get worse as you get into tomorrow. You've seen that on your past conditions. If you'd like to check that anytime, simply go to our website, weather.gov/Anchorage, and look for TV Desk there. A frontal boundary across the Brooks Range will continue to trap moisture north and along the Yukon Valley. Some of that could have some thunder and lightning in that. And another wave of low pressure working across the Aleutians will gradually scoot its way through Bristol Bay and into the western Gulf. As it does that between Tuesday and Wednesday, it's really going to pick up more moisture for west and southwestern Alaska. Meanwhile, leaving a lot of rainfall opportunities across the interior, and another wave of colder air starts to head for the Bering Strait with a wave of low pressure out in the west. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you again here tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.